I want to start with something personal. When I was young, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I asked my father where the universe came from. He thought for a moment, looked down at me, and said simply, "God made it." And I remember feeling satisfied by that answer. It was clean, it was complete. It felt like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I stopped wondering. And for a long time, that felt like enough. But here's what nobody told me then, and what I wish someone had. Stopping the question isn't the same as answering it. And the most honest, most human thing we can do with a big question is not to silence it with a comfortable answer, but to follow it carefully, humbly, wherever it actually leads. That's what I want to do with you today. Not to attack anyone's faith, not to mock what billions of people hold sacred, but to sit down together like two people genuinely trying to understand something important and look carefully at some of the most powerful arguments human beings have ever made for the existence of God. Because these arguments deserve serious engagement, not dismissal. And because you, whoever you are, deserve to think about them clearly. There's a question that has followed human beings for as long as we've been capable of asking questions at all. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does the universe exist? Why does life exist? Why do we exist? And is there some intelligence behind it all? These are not small questions. They're not trivial or dismissible. They're among the most profound questions a conscious mind can contemplate, and they deserve serious, honest, careful examination rather than either reflexive acceptance or reflexive dismissal. Let's start where most of these conversations start, with what philosophers call the cosmological argument. It goes something like this. Everything that exists must have a cause. The universe exists, therefore the universe must have a cause. And that cause, the argument concludes, is God. It's a clean logical structure on the surface, and you can see why it's been compelling to thoughtful people for centuries. I remember the first time I heard it laid out properly. It felt airtight, almost beautiful in its simplicity. But when you look at it carefully, I mean really look, a problem emerges almost immediately. If everything that exists requires a cause, then God also requires a cause. And if God can exist without a cause, without a beginning, without something that created God, then the argument is already quietly granted that some things can exist without a cause. And if some things can exist without a cause, why can't the universe itself be one of those things? The argument essentially assumes its conclusion. It declares that everything needs a cause and then slips in an exemption for the very thing it's trying to prove exists. That's not logic anymore. That's a circle dressed up as a straight line. Now, a thoughtful defender of this argument might respond by saying that God is different, that God is a necessary being, something that exists by definition, something whose very nature requires existence in a way that the universe doesn't. This is a genuinely sophisticated philosophical position, and I want to be fair to it. It's not a foolish idea. Brilliant minds have wrestled with it for centuries. But notice what's happened. We've moved from a simple, intuitive argument about causes to a highly abstract philosophical claim about necessary existence, a concept that even professional philosophers find slippery and difficult to pin down. And when we ask how we actually know that God is this kind of necessary being, the answer tends to circle back to the very claim we started with. We're going in circles again, just in a wider orbit. Modern physics adds another layer to this conversation, though we should be careful not to overstate it. Quantum mechanics, our best description of how things behave at the subatomic level, reveals a universe where causation is far stranger and more subtle than our everyday intuitions suggest. Virtual particles appear and disappear in empty space without any obvious cause in the classical sense. The laws of physics as we understand them don't actually require that the universe itself needed a prior cause, the way a domino needs a finger to push it. This doesn't prove the universe has no cause. I want to be honest about that uncertainty. We genuinely don't know what, if anything, preceded or caused the Big Bang. Anyone who tells you with complete confidence that they do know is going beyond what the evidence supports. But the simple gut-level intuition that everything obviously must have a cause, the way a thrown ball must have a thrower, that intuition starts to wobble at the frontier of what physics is discovering. Let's move to another argument, one that I personally find more emotionally powerful, maybe because it asks us to look not at abstract cosmology, but at the world right in front of us. This is the argument from design. Look at a living organism. Look at the human eye with its lens that focuses light, its iris that adjusts to changing brightness, its retina packed with photoreceptors that convert light into electrical signals your brain interprets as color and shape and movement. Look at the immune system, which somehow learns to recognize enemies it has never encountered before. Look at the way a single fertilized cell, smaller than a grain of sand, contains enough information to build an entire human being. Surely, the argument goes, something this complex, this breathtakingly fitted to its purpose, must have been designed. A camera has a designer. The eye is far more sophisticated than any camera. Doesn't it follow that the eye had a designer too? I understand why this argument moves people. I really do. There are moments looking at the natural world when the sense of design feels almost overwhelming. Standing in a forest, watching birds holding a newborn, these are moments when the word accident feels almost offensive. The appearance of design in living things is real and it is striking. But here's where evolutionary biology enters the conversation, and it enters with something genuinely remarkable, something that took me time to fully appreciate. Natural selection, working on random genetic variation over vast stretches of time, is capable of building structures of extraordinary complexity through a completely blind, undirected process. No plan, no foresight, no designer, just the simple, brutal logic of survival. The key insight, the one that changes everything once you really grasp it, is that it doesn't happen all at once. The eye didn't appear fully formed in a single dramatic moment. It developed incrementally through thousands upon thousands of tiny steps, each one providing some small advantage to the organism that had it. A patch of light-sensitive cells is better than nothing. A slight depression that helps localize the direction of light is better than a flat patch. A deeper depression with a narrower opening improves resolution further still. Each incremental step is preserved because it helps the organism survive and reproduce just a little bit better than its neighbors. And we have evidence for these intermediate stages, not just in theory, but in living organisms right now. Eyes at various levels of complexity exist across the animal kingdom, from simple light-sensitive spots in flatworms to the compound eyes of insects to the camera-like eyes of vertebrates. The fossil record, genetics, and comparative anatomy all tell the same story. Natural selection is a real, powerful, and genuinely sufficient explanation for biological complexity. It doesn't require a designer. It just requires time, variation, selection. Three simple ingredients that produce, given enough generations, something that looks for all the world like it was planned. But there's something else worth sitting with here, even if we set evolution aside entirely, even if we granted, just hypothetically, that the universe and life within it show clear evidence of design, this still wouldn't tell us anything specific about the nature of the designer. It wouldn't tell us the designer is omnipotent or morally good, or that the designer cares about human beings, or that the designer is still present, or that the designer has communicated with any particular person or written any particular book. The distance between something complex might have a cause, and therefore the God of this specific religious tradition exists with these specific properties and wants these specific things from you is an enormous distance. The design argument, even at its strongest, doesn't come close to covering that ground. There's a third argument I want to examine, and this one is different because it doesn't deal in logic or biology. It deals in human experience, in the testimony of real people about real moments in their lives. This is the argument from religious experience. Hundreds of millions of people across every culture and every century of recorded history have reported profound personal experiences of something they describe as divine, transcendent, or sacred. Moments of overwhelming peace, of feeling known and loved by something vast and intelligent, of the ordinary world suddenly becoming transparent to something deeper. These experiences feel, to the people having them, more real than anything else they've ever known. They transform lives. They produce genuine kindness, genuine courage, genuine moral commitment. Isn't all of that evidence of something real? This is the argument I find hardest to dismiss quickly because it would be both intellectually dishonest and humanly unkind to do so. These experiences genuinely happen to real people. They matter. They change lives. I'm not interested in explaining them away with a wave of the hand. But here's the question we have to ask carefully. The experience is real. What does it tell us about the cause? The human brain is extraordinary in its capacity to generate powerful subjective states. We know this from neuroscience, from psychology, from the study of meditation, dreams, and certain neurological conditions. Experiences that feel absolutely real, that feel more real than ordinary waking life, can be generated by the brain under various conditions without necessarily corresponding to an external reality. This isn't a comfortable thing to say, but honesty requires saying it, and there's a pattern worth noticing. People across vastly different religious traditions report profound spiritual experiences, but they interpret those experiences through the framework of their own tradition. A Christian mystic experiences Christ. A devout Hindu practitioner experiences Brahman. A Buddhist meditator reaches states that the tradition interprets without reference to a creator God at all. The experiences converge in their power and their transformative quality, but they diverge in their content and their theological implications. If these experiences were direct perception of a single objective divine reality, we might expect more convergence in what people actually perceive. The divergence suggests that cultural context and prior belief shape the experience significantly, which is exactly what we expect if these states arise from the brain's own remarkable inner life. None of this proves that God does not exist. I want to say that clearly and mean it. The fact that these arguments have problems, that evolutionary biology explains biological complexity without requiring design, that religious experiences have naturalistic explanations available, none of this constitutes proof of absence. Intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that openly. What we can say is that these arguments don't deliver what their proponents claim they deliver. They don't provide the kind of solid, independent evidence for a specific divine being that would justify the confidence with which they're sometimes presented. Science, by its nature, works within the physical world. It asks questions that can be tested, makes predictions that can be checked, and changes its mind when the evidence demands it. This has been spectacularly successful. But some people argue reasonably that this success comes from a self-imposed limitation, that science rules out the supernatural by its own definition. That's a fair point. The honest response is not that science has disproven God. The honest response is that we should proportion our confidence to the strength of the evidence. And the evidence, when examined carefully and without wishful thinking, is thinner than we're often told. What I find most interesting about all of this is not where the arguments land, but what the process of examining them reveals. The willingness to ask hard questions about our deepest beliefs, not out of hostility, not out of arrogance, but out of genuine respect for truth, is one of the most deeply human things we can do. My father gave me that comfortable answer when I was 7, and I love him for it. He was doing what parents do. He was giving me something to hold on to. But I think he would also understand, if he could see me now, that holding on tightly to a map without ever checking whether it's accurate isn't faith. It's something closer to fear. There are questions that remain genuinely open. Why is there something rather than nothing? How did consciousness arise from matter? Why do the laws of physics have the particular values they have? These questions sit at the frontier of what human knowledge can currently reach, and honest scientists should acknowledge that with real humility. Mystery is real, wonder is appropriate. The universe is genuinely, staggeringly remarkable, and the existence of beings capable of contemplating their own existence, of doing mathematics, of composing music, of asking why, is astonishing by any measure. Whether that astonishment should resolve into theism, atheism, or something more nuanced is something each person has to work out through honest engagement with evidence and argument. There's no shortcut. There's no authority you can simply defer to. The questions are too important for that, and you are too capable of thinking clearly for that. What I hope you carry away from this is not a conclusion, but a habit. The habit of following a question wherever it leads, even when the destination is uncomfortable. The habit of holding your beliefs loosely enough to examine them, firmly enough to act on them. The habit of treating uncertainty not as a failure, but as the honest beginning of real understanding. Because the questions themselves, the big ones, the ones that kept a 7-year-old awake looking at the ceiling, those questions are not a problem to be solved and set aside. They're an invitation. And the only wrong response to an invitation like that is to stop wondering